Hey, welcome to another episode of On the Line, coming to you from Guardian RFID. Guys, great topic today. We're going to talk about some tips and how to manage a crime scene, basically the do's and the don'ts. And my guest today is none other than author and also a fellow YouTube influencer, Gary York. What's up, Gary?
Hello, Anthony. How you doing? Thank you for having me on today, and I appreciate it. And this is an area that I like to talk about and have worked with before, and I appreciate it.
Hey, Gary, do you mind just introducing yourself, telling my audience the books that you have out and also your YouTube channel?
Yes, I have a YouTube channel called True Prison Stories by Gary York, and I have a book, Corruption Behind Bars and Inside the Inner Circle, and I'm working on a new one called The Toughest Job. Should be out in a few weeks. And it's exactly what it sounds like, describing the toughest job as being a correctional officer and what we go through as correctional officers.
I love that title. Hey, Gary, so real quick, I don't know, a lot of agencies, some of them, they don't provide training when it comes to crime scene management. So it's good for us to do a video like this because it gives people a resource to check. And I mean, when it comes to preserving the crime scene, I mean, obviously different states may have different laws, but I like to think that when it comes to the preservation of a crime scene, there are pretty much certain things that are universal. Continuity of evidence, making sure, we log in and out, who's going into that, what's their purpose, and basically if it's in a cell, securing the cell. So real quick, I mean, just to kind of get an idea of how important it is to secure a crime scene, obviously. What are some of the reasons why we want to make sure, before we get into tips, why we don't want to screw this up?
Well, the question, of course, is why do we need a crime scene? Well, we need a crime scene because we want to keep all the critical evidence preserved. We do not want our evidence contaminated. That's one reason. Another reason is we need this uncontaminated evidence to lead to a conviction or an acquittal. We don't just go out and say everybody's going to be convicted. We need it to prove either a conviction or an acquittal. So it's very important to maintain a crime scene. Now, I handle crime scenes in prison and jails, and it's very important to protect DNA, location of all the items within the crime scene, blood splatters, possible weapons in the crime scene that we don't know yet that could have been used as a weapon, or obvious weapons in the crime scene. So the faster we can secure a crime scene, collect our evidence, the better. We don't want to collect evidence hastily, but we want to get it collected properly and as quick as we can because that preserves it.
And there's also a lot of universal precaution. I mean, sometimes when you have a death of an inmate in a cell and it's not through natural causes, or we don't think it's through natural causes, that is automatically going to be a crime scene. If you have blood in a cell, that could be a crime scene. It gets tougher when you have bigger areas that could be the crime scene, like a mess hall or a yard. But either way, when an incident occurs, the officer on scene may be the one that's being told by their supervisor to secure this location. I guess right now we could focus on a cell, but I'm sure what we're going to say could also apply to any area. I mean, that's the key. But let's just say you have a major assault in a cell, a lot of blood. So, the officers come in, they break up the inmates, they do what they can, but now you have the cell where the assault occurred. What's the first things that you would expect to be handled by the supervisors on scene?
Well, Anthony, you hit the nail right on the head. Just real quick, and then I'm going to answer that question. How big should my crime scene be? That's a big question, okay? How big should my crime scene be? Well, of course, your crime scene should be the exact spot the crime took place. Okay, that's the crime scene. So you talked about a cell that we're going to use. But what if it took place in multiple locations? For example, an inmate is in the day room. He says something derogatory to another inmate. That inmate gets up leaves the day room, goes to his cell, gets a shank from his cell, comes back, stabs the inmate in the day room. He runs down the hall past the officer's station, bleeding and yelling, and the inmate continues to stab him. The inmate runs outside the dorm because maybe it's open time then, open compound right now. And he stabs the inmate outside the door. He falls outside dead. He buries the shank in the sand near the dorm. Well, now the entire dorm plus the outside of the dorm is your crime scene. Just something to keep in mind. Crime scenes, as you said, can be as little as the cell or the entire dorm and all around the dorm. And it could be the entire prison too in some cases. But to answer your question.
Hey, Gary, real quick too. Imagine when you have a riot and you have multiple crime scenes.
A riot is what, when I said the entire prison, a riot was what I was thinking, just like you.
Yeah.
That is the entire prison as your crime scene. But we'll go to the cell, as you mentioned. Now you're at the cell. You have several tools to use to secure the crime scene. One, of course, we all know about, whether you're in the business or not, the yellow crime scene tape. Two is the officer on the scene, as you mentioned before, will now become the officers running possibly a security log. And we want every exit and entrance to the area secured off with officers. And we want someone to be writing in the security log, time of incident, who enters the area, who exits the area, who's allowed in the area, when the evidence was picked up. Now, your crime scene tech, whoever that may be at your jail or prison, could be an officer too. It's happened, you know, where officers or inspectors, inspectors are collecting evidence. That happens a lot. They're also gonna be bag, tag, and time, date, and location. So there's one way of making sure when the evidence picked up, but we want your security log to also indicate evidence picked up and photographs taken. You know, all these things are written down. I know we're not going to go great deep detail today, but just everything that happens is written down. Now, one thing I always said, don't confuse your rank with my authority. What do I mean by that? I've put this correctional officer in charge of that crime scene. That's their job. And you say, officer, these are the only people allowed in: medical, investigator, crime scene techs. That's it. Listen, folks, we're not trying to be rude here, but sometimes people want to see what's going on. And this captain, this colonel, and everybody wants to come get in the scene and see what's going on. I'm the colonel. Well, just stay steady, folks. This is a crime scene. Let's don't get a bunch of people trampling in that crime scene and contaminating it with their fingerprints, their footprints, or whatever else they may have.
Right. And I know that you also want the person that's kind of watching that crime scene to not have been involved in the incident. So even if they were the ones that were doing the escort, or, you know, hopefully they're not the ones, you know, that did the assault, you don't want them involved in the incident. You want to keep that totally objective. And also the supervisor on scene, as a universal precaution, even before it's declared to be a crime scene. But let's say you have lots of blood, whatever it is, they could make the initiative. And then what you could do later is just lift it. You know, sometimes what happens is a lot of the supervisors may not feel that they can make the authority to call it a crime scene. Yeah, they can make the initiative. And if it's needed, great job. We did what we had to do immediately. If it's not needed, then we just collapse it, correct?
Right, exactly. Why risk it? Make it a crime scene. If you're in doubt, make it a crime scene. And just as you said, the first officer on the scene is normally who we want to take over the crime scene. But as you said, I gave you a scenario where an officer in the officer station saw an inmate getting stabbed. We don't want that officer to be doing the crime scene. That's a prime witness. We want that officer taken out of the dorm and placed somewhere until we're ready to interview them. That officer will not be on the crime scene. And you're absolutely right. We want first officer on the scene coming in from somewhere else.
Right. And then also, when we talked about the evidence too, the thing about the evidence too is sometimes, guys, in my mind, whoever bags the evidence should be the one that takes it to where it's got to go, whether it's the internal affairs Dropbox or investigator Dropbox, whatever it is. let's keep it limited how many hands it has to travel, the continuity evidence. Sometimes I've seen where maybe the unit officer gets something, writes the continuity evidence form, but then decides, well, I'm going to give it to the general assignment officer, who will then go ahead and drop it. No. Have the general assignment officer now cover the unit, and now you take it straight there. This way you don't have so many hands touching it. People are like, well, you could document the switch offs. Why? Just have the one officer, as best you can, get it from point A directly to the drop box. Correct me. How many times do you have evidence that winds up going through so many hands that the evidence loses credibility?
Well, Anthony, great point. What do you think let's say this goes to court, you got a state attorney working the case. That drives them nuts, because now what happens? Instead of 2 people on the chain of custody, I've got this evidence with 8 names on it. I've got to subpoena every one of these people in court just to say and get on the stand, yes, I took it from so-and-so, and then I took it, I signed it over, and then I took it and signed it over to so-and-so. Well, it also gives the defense tons of questions, more people to question, and more chance to prove that the evidence was mishandled. Even if an officer is stumbled up and says the wrong thing, now the defense looks at the jury and says, see, this evidence is tainted. That's one reason you only want the person who bags it, maybe directly to the investigator, or maybe if the investigator's not there, directly to your evidence room to be locked up until the inspector gets there.
Now, you also mentioned the logbook. Obviously, that is very important, because the officer that is in charge of letting people in and out, that logbook, you obviously don't let anybody in unless they have the approval of the shift commander, who should be in constant contact with the investigative authorities and whatnot, because most likely a lot of this stuff before the investigative authorities get there is going to be handled over the phone. So, they're going to be like, okay, well, these are the people that are allowed to go in, and that officer that's handling that crime scene cannot be afraid to tell people, no, I don't have you scheduled. You can't come in. You can't mess with my crime scene. And even if they make the attempt, write them in the book. But at that time, they tried and they were denied. They tried again and they were denied. Sometimes, as you mentioned, some officers or some supervisors may try to use their rank to check it out. No, sorry. And I promise you guys, if that officer that's maintained that crime scene does as they're told, the person that's going to get in trouble is the person trying to manipulate entrance, not you. You're the one that's going to hold on to your job. And I will tell you one thing, if by chance that supervisor tries to use the rank and you allow that, you were also going to be in trouble, because now your job is to maintain the crime scene and you have failed to do so. Correct, Gary?
Correct. And the worst thing you can do is take the attention away from the officer trying to keep the crime scene safe and keep proper documentation. You start going in there and asking questions or wanting to go in. Now he's talking to you or she's talking to you, and then something happens over here. Don't bother the crime scene and don't bother the person keeping the security log. Please let them do their job, because remember, if somebody is injured badly or dead, or it's a murder, whatever the case may be, we want somebody to pay for that crime. And we're not going to get it done if you're interfering with the crime scene.
Now, mind you, I said assault because obviously if there's a murder, it's a lot different, 100% different, including what custody could do with the body. They're allowed to take the body out of the cell and do what they can to try to revive it. People are like, oh, they can't touch the body. Yes, you can. You can go all day and try to do what you can until that person has been declared deceased. But another thing here also with maintaining the crime scene before we come to a close, guys, is that it really does. This is one of the most important jobs that we have that isn't stressed enough, because we want to make sure that when an inmate does something foolish, that we're able to kind of trust the justice system into doing what they need to do. But that's because we've given them everything they could to maintain what they need to do. And sometimes when we just slip, even in the slightest, it's enough for a good lawyer to rip us apart, 100%. So again, maintaining the crime scene is essential. It starts the moment that person comes on scene and says there's a crime scene, whoever needs to declare it. And again, I like the universal precaution. I don't know. Well, if you don't know, declare it, and we can figure it out. Sometimes people are like, well, I didn't know if I should have said it or not. Well, the moment you don't know, universal precaution, make it a crime scene. If you don't know, make it a crime scene, because at the end of the day, we could always collapse. But the last thing you want, especially, is, the searches. Let's say they're, after the inmates have been taken to medical, you find out there was a weapon involved. Let the investigators do their search, because sometimes, there's an investigator or there's a weapon, I'm going to go right in. Don't. It's a crime scene now. Everything's closed off. Hopefully, maybe you have a camera right on the crime scene so they can see that nobody's coming in. That's a good idea to have a camera there so they can see that there's nobody coming into that scene. And the investigators will go ahead, and once they secured the scene, they figure, okay, we got all the evidence we need and everything, then they may be the ones that do the search, or they may say, you know what, we're good to go. Please do us a favor, have someone from custody do the search. And then once the search is completed and we got the weapon, we'll let you know if we can collapse the crime scene or if we still need the crime scene up and running. Is that sort of how it works, Gary?
Correct. And don't ever take anything out of the crime scene, not even a food tray. You think, oh, let me just pick up the tray. The food tray may need to be tested and go to toxicology to compare what's in the inmate stomach or the victim's stomach, in case it's not a death by stabbing or something that we don't know. A lot of things get smuggled in the prison, right? Poison, drugs, and etc. Not even a food tray, not even a piece of cornbread. Don't quickly get the inmate orderlies or inmate trustees to come in and mop up things. No, leave every liquid there, but watch for yourself. Wear your gloves and your mask if you have to. Be careful to protect yourself from things that are in the crime scene.
Right. Now, remember, guys, also the key for that officer is ultimately limit the traffic, even around the area. If it's in a unit, if you have to lock down that unit until we can make sure that the investigative authorities got everything they needed, then we're good. But in the end, is preserving that crime scene, universal precaution. And again, I know we stuck strictly to an assault, but there's a lot of things that could be taken from this that could be applied to other things. Like as we said, the riot, a murder, whatever the case may be. But the key is, guys, is universal precaution. You gotta make sure no one tampers with the evidence. And the officer that's controlling that logbook, you have a great responsibility to keep the integrity of what's happening. That's the key, keeping that integrity. Hey, Gary, anything you'd like to say in closing?
I just want to tell everybody your job in the jail or prison is no different than the police on the street. We all run a little city, and we all deal with the same crimes as they do on the street. Thank you for your service, and take care.
All right, guys, this is another episode of On the Line. Thanks, Gary, for coming on. It was a good episode. Briefly gave you some tips on to maintain a crime scene. It's good because it starts the dialogue up. That's the key. So we put enough out there, and then hopefully the community just keeps the dialogue going so we can learn more from each other. As always, guys, please, if you get a chance, check out Guardian RFID's YouTube channel. They have a lot of good information out there. Our boy Stephen Menard is hitting up some really good videos. And as always, guys, please stay safe.